All right, welcome to module number 9, the nature of light. We're going to start with natural light. And natural light, it has a quantity of light, how much light is there, and that's where we use the f-stop and shutter speed to and ISO to compensate for either too much light or not enough light to make the proper exposure. We have the quality of light, hard light, soft light, direct sun, open shade, that kind of thing. We have the color of light. We talked about artificial light a little bit in the last module, different light sources having different colors. We touch a little bit on natural light, sunset, foggy days, things like that. But natural light also has distinct color to it. And so we need to be aware of that. And then we also can shape natural light, which means we can change the color, we can change the quantity, and we can change the quality. And that's what we mean by shaping light. And in a photographer's job is certainly taking advantage of the light that's present, but also in constructing an image, shaping that light might make that image a little bit more interesting or able to communicate what the photographer wants to do. So we need a quantity of light to make exposure on the sensor. We need a certain amount. And like I said, we use the f-stop or shutter speed to control how much light's falling on the sensor to give it the proper exposure, right, in the camera. So that's where we play around with the controls basically on the camera to the extent that we can put something in front of natural light, the sun, to cut it down or change the change the intensity, then we would. Quality of light. Now we're going to use these two words, and they're almost two extremes: specular and diffuse. When I say specular, what I mean is a very hard spot light source like the sun. And when you look at objects that are illuminated by the sun, often in those objects that have a surface that's got some irregularity to it, a curve, but it's shiny, right? You get these little specular highlights or little points of light reflected back to the camera. That's specular light. Diffuse light is more like open shade. It's more like an overcast day, right? Light's coming from the entire sky. You put a big row of clouds over the top of the sun, and therefore the entire sky is your light source, not just that pinpoint that's the sun. So each of these qualities of light provide a different way of describing the surfaces in a photograph. Whether it's a face, whether it's a car, whether it's grass, whether it's paint on the side of the house, they all have different ways of describing that surface, right? The light, the shadow, how it reflects off, the contrast, things like that. I'm going to show you some examples here. On the left, we have fluorescent lights that are in your house, in school, in grocery stores, right? Just those banks of fluorescence. And you can see the shadows caused by those fluorescents underneath our little model's chin here. It's soft. There's a soft transition, okay, to the light. There's no real distinct direction. Now you get a little bit up here, a catch light in the eye, so you know it's coming from above, a little shadow under the nose, but it's not a real distinct direction of light. It's coming from everywhere up in the ceiling. In the middle, we have a direct light source, or a specular light source. This is a studio light, and I'm not using natural light here. I'm using a studio light to simulate what the natural light would be. And you can see the hard shadows that it's caused. The light's down maybe, about here, shining on her face. You can see that hard shadow on her cheek, the hard shadow on her lips and her nose. And then you could also see what happens to the hair. And the contrast, right? We have a very light surface, and then we have this deep shadow right here. So it really creates a difference in intensity between those two parts of the face. And then lastly, over here on the right, we have a diffuse light source, or a soft light source. So this is like a 2 by 3 foot, light box with some diffusion material or shower curtain material on the front to make that light, instead of being a pinpoint, to make it be a larger light source. Now look what's happened to the shadow here on the nose. Look what happened to the shadow here on the face. Right? Look at that transition now, how round that is versus how abrupt this is. Okay, so as I said, these different, one light source isn't better than the other. One light source isn't, preferable. They're just different. You might say, well, I like what's going on the one on the right, but the center one I have more control. And it's more distinct, right? Her nose, the size of her nose, the shape of her nose. So you play with different qualities of light to create different effects on the subject you're photographing. And of course, this happens just to be a mannequin head. She doesn't complain much when I do all these experiments on her, so that's why I like to use her as my model. We saw this before in the last module. We still deal with colors of light: red, green, and blue, yellow, magenta, and cyan. When we want to mix that light together, green and red is yellow, green and blue is cyan, blue and red is magenta. We talked about that. But what's more important now is, instead of mixing it, is how these colors resonate. And I know that I talked a little bit about that in the last module. But what happens when you photograph something that has red and magenta in it? Right? Those colors that are next to each other, or red and yellow, or yellow and green. Right? Those colors that are next to each other, they kind of blend a little bit. They have parts of each other in them, so they don't stand out as much. They don't have a contrast to them. Whereas if we had something that was green and magenta, or red and cyan, or yellow and blue, the opposite colors, then all of a sudden we have this intense relationship between these two, and this intense contrast between these two, and it draws a lot more attention to the photograph. So in the case where you're doing a bold, in-your-face, pay attention to me kind of photograph for a billboard, magazine cover, something you want to stop people in your tracks, well, think about using those opposite colors. Those photographs that you want people to relax, to sit and just enjoy, to calm them down. The kind of pictures you may find in a dentist's office or in a hospital. Right? They're not supposed to get you all excited. They're supposed to chill you out. So in that situation, think about what happens when we mix colors that are next to each other, and how they kind of go together and flow together in a much more rhythmic kind of way. Okay, so think about when you're either finding the image, choosing a time of day with a particular color of light, or constructing the image with natural light. What colors do you choose for the light? What color do you choose for the subjects? And then how do they mix together? We looked at a little bit of this in the last module, so it's a little bit of a review. Daylight at sunrise, we're on the lower color temperature, so it's a little bit more yellow. Noon direct sun, we're at basically what we call white light, equal parts of red, green, and blue, 5500. Overcast day, dull foggy day, the temperature goes up and up and up, and as it goes up and up and up, the light gets more blue. All right, so I'm not going to ask you a question on the test. What's the color temperature of daylight on an overcast day? Because it may not be 7,000. It may be something close. Right? What is daylight at noon is 55. That's a given, right? That's fixed. It's pretty darn close. Sunrise, sunset, it depends on how much junk's in the air. Is it a day during the summer when there's all kinds of smog and dust in the air, or is it in the wintertime when there's been a breeze and the skies are really clear? You'll have different color temperatures. So it's less important exactly what the temperature is, but it's more important to remember that the lower the color temperature, the more yellow the light is. The higher the color temperature, the more blue the light is. Okay? Does that make sense? So here's a good example of these two different colors of light in the same scene, and my camera's on automatic white balance. This was shot at Point Sur Lighthouse, and that's a white picket fence, and the ground is asphalt, so it's gray, but it's in the shade. So The shade has a higher color temperature, it's more blue. Where the mountains are being lit by the sun, that's 5500. So now in one photograph, I have two different colors of light. So what do? If I want to make the fence more white, more like it really is, I'm going to have to remove the blue, which is going to be adding yellow to the scene. Whether I remove blue or add yellow in post-production, you can do it either way. It's the same net effect. And when I do that, the fence post will become white and the asphalt will become neutral gray. But what's going to happen to the mountains? They're going to be yellow. Not looking as they should. Now, of course, you're going to say, well, that's not hard. Just go around and select all that blue, do a little chroma key kind of thing, or do a little smart selection, and then just change that one area. Yeah, you can. Right? That's one way of dealing with this. I don't think it's a good enough photograph to trace every one of those pickets to change their color. I just think it's a good example of two different color temperatures present in a photograph that I think detracts a little bit from it. If it was neutral, I think it would have a little bit more impact and contrast. But again, is it really worth all that effort in Photoshop? I think not. Here's another good example. This is from Death Valley. The mountains in the foreground are the same color as the mountains in the background. The mountains in the foreground, these, are being lit by the sun at sunset, so it's warmer. The mountains back here are in the shade, so it's more blue. Sorry, this is more yellow, this is more blue. So the camera and automatic white balance, it picks something in between. It made this a little less yellow and made this a little less blue, but certainly that's not neutral, nor is this. Now again, if you wanted to change this, that's fine. You can select this, neutralize this, but maybe you don't want to. Because that beautiful warm light at the end of the day makes that mountain look kind of cool. And it really contrasts with the sky and the blue and the mountains behind it, because yellow and blue are opposite. So when you have those in the same photograph, you have some contrast. You have some excitement in the image. Okay? But you can't go in and globally, on this whole image, take away some of this yellow without affecting everything else. So this is where, if you're going to do this, it has to be masking and selective color balance. Or, like I said, for landscape photographs, this is acceptable. People like this because it creates that contrast. Another example from Death Valley. These are salt, leftover salt, whatever they are, and they're white. They're not blue. This mountain is it's dirt. It's not yellow like that. You can see the snow. It's very yellow. Right at sunrise. This is easier. You could draw a line right here and change this and change that and neutralize both of them. But just maybe, if you did, it wouldn't feel like sunrise because it would be neutral and it wouldn't have the same impact. So again, another landscape where this blue and yellow, right, that help to create some tension, some contrast in the photograph tend to work when it comes to a landscape photograph. I don't know why all these came from Death Valley, but they did. I must have been in my Death Valley folder when I was putting together this this example. So here's the sun hitting a dune, very yellow, a little bit of blue even down here, right, on the dune compared to here. And then, of course, the mountains back here. These aren't blue mountains. I don't know anywhere in the world that has blue mountains. Right? This is dirt, this is rock, it's gray, brown, something like that. It's not blue. It's the color of light. Right? And also the light's being filtered because it's far away, and it's changing its color a little bit with the atmospheric garbage in the air. But a lot of it's shadow, and that's where that blue's coming from. Okay, so again, that contrast that's happening between the yellow and the blue sometimes works in your favor. Okay, so we can shape, as I said before, natural light. We can change and from specular to diffuse, we can control the amount of contrast. That means how dark the deepest shadow is and how bright the highlight is, right? And we can control the color by using our white balance on our camera or multiple other ways of filtering the lens on the camera or filtering the light that's hitting a particular part of the image. Harder to filter the sun hitting a mountain, but not so hard to filter the sun hitting a small little flower, as you would imagine. Okay? And there's colored filters that can do that. All right, so back to our Willing model. So here's the starting image with the specular light. My finger was in there as I was explaining the difference from one side to the other. So when we talk about contrast, we talk about this value versus this value. Very light, very dark. Lots of contrast. Right? Over here, a little bit less contrast. Okay? So what I did over here on the middle one is, if you can see this right here, it's a white disc. It's got a semi-reflected surface on it. And the light's coming in from the right, going across the face to the left. And in the first one, I let it just go. But in the second one, I brought in a fill card. I brought in something white to bounce the light back into the face. Now look at this compared to this. Look at the shadow there compared to the shadow there. So this is how you can control the contrast, right, with natural light, just by taking a card and moving that in and filling that area with light. I have some links on the introduction page for this module that shows you some links of me doing this demo for students. It's not filmed or recorded the best, but it gives you an idea live of what I'm talking about if for some reason this isn't clear. So this is basically same light source, same distance away, nothing's changed, same camera to subject distance, nothing's changed. All I've done is take this white disc and move it in to have light that's coming from the right to the left, hit this white disc, and then bounce in. Bounce in to the left side of her face. And then lastly, the one on the right, same thing, same light, same position, same camera position, but instead of having a white disc, I used a yellow one. So be aware, if you change the color of your reflector or your fill, it says gold, it will change the color of light. So there's another way we can change the color. And you can see now we're doing basically the same thing we did here, but because the fill card here is gold, it's warming up her face or making it look more yellow. Okay, so excuse me. So we can come in with a blue card, an orange card, a pink card, a green card, and whatever we put up there to reflect the light back, it's going to take on that color. And in some cases that's preferable because it makes it look interesting, but in some cases that could be really bad. You know, being up next to a green wall and then having all the faces be green, not so good. Okay, so just remember that whatever you're using as a fill source or adding light back into the shadow side of